ignorant.
All of you, get back in the closet.
How
Go
much does
yourself.
it cost for fascism? How much do the taxpayers have to pay for a fascist country?
They're evil. They are activists doing evil. So treat them like the evil that they are.
The time to start is now, right? The time to plant a tree is 10 years ago, and the second best time is now. Strikes are the most effective way to stop profits, get demands, and force policy changes. If you can shut down profit, you can make any politician do anything.
It's time to stop pretending otherwise. It's time to be ruthless and time to afford them the same amount of grace that they give to their Palestinian victims, because they are only going to get more and more ruthless with their victims if you don't.
Mic check, 1, 2. What's up? Welcome to the stream. We're going to start with headlines and then go into more specific stories. Let's
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Palestinians in Gaza are trying to identify the bodies of their relatives who were released by Israel. Many of the bodies showed signs of torture and summary execution, with gunshots to the head and marks from blindfolds and handcuffs. Here's Ghada Musbeh, whose husband is still missing.
The Red Cross has brought bodies, 90 bodies, and we have come to see if my husband is with them or not. The appearance of the martyrs, we do not know who they are because they are disfigured and the Israelis have tortured them. We don't know anything about them. Their appearance, we don't know where my husband is. It is not known.
Israeli officials say they're extending the detention of Dr. Hussam Abu Safia by 6 months.
look at this. Palestinian families with missing family members attend a meeting to try and identify disfigured and visibly tortured bodies returned by the occupation. The face was disfigured by torture, but I recognized him from a mole near his nose and the shape of his teeth, said Akram al-Mansara, identifying one of his 2 missing sons. Hold on a second. Hold the fucking phone, dude. Dude, the Twitter media player is dog shit, but that picture was of a body with no eyes. The National Congress of my party, the PCDOB, began yesterday and will continue until Sunday in Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. Nice. So what happens in the Congress? But yeah, basically they just had like files and files of photographs. I guess each file is an individual. Just a letter and a number. And they're just all in this room. With a single TV above their heads. That's wild. You only get a flash of the room.
Whose husband is still missing. It kind of looks like the same room. You can tell by the background. We'll discuss the theses that the Central Committee has drawn up, elect a new president, and see if we will continue in the coalition we are in. Democracy in motion. It's beautiful to see.
I'm happy for you, Vitor. It's great news. Anyway, we're gonna continue with headlines.
The Red Cross has brought bodies, 90 bodies, and we have come to see if my husband is with them or not. The appearance of the martyrs, we do not know who they are.
Israeli officials say they're extending the detention of Dr. Hussam Abu Safia by 6 months. The pediatrician was kidnapped during a raid on Kamal Adwan Hospital last December. Meanwhile, Hamas returned the remains of 2 more dead Israeli hostages, but reiterated that it will need specialized equipment to locate bodies still buried beneath the rubble. The UN estimates that 55 million tons of debris must be cleared before Gaza reconstruction efforts can begin. This week, Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, called on the military to prepare a comprehensive plan to defeat Hamas should the Gaza ceasefire collapse.
55 million tons. It's like, what is that, like 25 million cars?
In Washington, President Trump repeated his threats against Hamas.
They brought back bodies today, as you probably know. But they also said they're going to behave. We're going to find out.
Also, why does Hamas, like, why do they look like social workers with AKs? Are they trying to say that guy was Hamas? Oh, he's Hamas. He's wearing a balaclava and stuff. Oops.
Collapse.
But him? Is he? He looks like an assistant principal with an AK. What the fuck?
In Washington, President
on
Trump
things.
repeated his threats against Hamas.
They brought back bodies today, as you probably know. But they also said they're going to behave. We're going to find out if they behave. If they behave good, if they don't behave, we'll take care of it.
In New Jersey, protesters led by Jewish Voice for Peace on Thursday occupied the lobby of a Newark high-rise that's home to an office of Democratic Senator Cory Booker. Protesters wore shirts reading, "Stop Arming Israel," and carried messages including, "Booker, let Gaza live," and "Booker, stop funding genocide." They cited Senator Booker's votes to send $26 billion to support Israel's assault.
Booker's having a bad week. He got roasted by the I Had It ladies, and then now this.
On Gaza last year, and to eliminate funding to the UN Relief Agency for Palestinian refugees. Booker also voted against Bernie Sanders' joint resolutions of disapproval to block U.S. arms transfers to Israel. President Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, was indicted by a grand jury on Thursday on charges that he mishandled classified documents. Bolton is a prominent...
Yeah, I don't give a fuck about that. And the Supreme Court minister who will retire will vote on an action that calls for the decriminalization of abortion up to the 12th week. The expectation is that the vote will be in favor of decriminalization. Nice. Steps in the right direction. Honestly, votes like that legit save lives, you know, of women and babies, you know.
Critic of President Trump, and had published a book about his tumultuous time in the White House during the first Trump administration. In a statement, Bolton said, quote, "Now I have become the latest target in weaponizing the Justice Department to charge those he deems to be his enemies with charges that were declined before or distort the facts." This comes as President Trump's Justice Department has secured indictments against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James in recent weeks. The U.S. launched another strike on a boat allegedly carrying drugs in the Caribbean on Thursday. A U.S. official tells Reuters it's the first time there are survivors of the attack. Since September, the U.S. has reportedly killed 27 people in attacks against suspected drug boats off the coast of Venezuela. This comes as Venezuela has requested the UN Security Council to declare that the U.S. strikes are illegal, calling on the body to back Venezuela's sovereignty. Here's Venezuelan Ambassador to the United Nations, Samuel Moncada.
What do we ask of the Security Council? First, that it investigates a series of murders that the government of the United States of America has been perpetrating in our region and determines their illegal nature. Second, to confirm the threat that these illicit actions pose to the preservation of peace in Latin America and the Caribbean.
Meanwhile, the U.S. admiral who commands military forces in Latin America, Alvin Halsey, will step down from his post at the end of this year.
Historic.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth made the announcement on social media. It comes less than a year after Halsey took over the position, which normally lasts for 3 years. The New York Times reports a U.S. official said Halsey, quote, had raised concerns about the mission and the attacks on the alleged drug boats. This comes as a former U.S. Marine Corps Colonel, Doug Krugman, published an op-ed in the Washington Post on Thursday titled, "I resign from the military because of Trump." After serving for 24 years, he wrote, quote, "I gave up my career out of concern for our country's future."
You know when, like, people who sign up to be, you know, fascist jackboots, essentially, for the military-industrial complex of the United States, when they start to grow a conscience, or they start to get squeamish with what's happening with foreign policy, that should be, like, extremely alarming.
Meanwhile, a network of more than 340 former officers of the CIA, the NSA, the State Department, and other national security...
I mean, it's not alarming that they grew a spine, but it's like, even these guys, you know?
The agencies published a report detailing that the U.S. is, quote, "on a trajectory toward authoritarian rule." The group, calling itself the Steady State, said in a statement, quote, "We wrote the report because the same tools we once used to assess foreign risks now show unmistakable warning signs at home." Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is meeting President Trump at the White House today, where he's expected to make his case for supplies of U.S. long-range missiles. Trump has hinted he may supply Ukraine with ground-launched Tomahawk cruise missiles. Kremlin officials have repeatedly warned against providing the weapons, which can be used to carry nuclear warheads.
I respect veterans, for the most part. Not active duty. Hell no.
And were banned until 2019, when Russia and the first Trump administration withdrew from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty.
If you are still active duty, like, you are reaping the benefits of colonialism, man.
On Thursday, Trump said after a lengthy phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin that the pair would discuss the war in Ukraine at an upcoming meeting in Budapest, Hungary. Trump described the phone call as very productive. Before winning the 2024 election, Trump repeatedly pledged from the campaign trail he'd end the war in Ukraine on the first day. In Chicago, a federal judge ruled Thursday immigration agents will be required to wear body cameras as she called on a senior official to testify in court to discuss an operation that's led to 1,000 arrests.
We'll see if that's enforced.
U.S. District Judge Sarah Ellis said she was startled after seeing video of ICE agents tear-gassing protesters, saying, quote, "I live in Chicago, if folks haven't noticed, and I'm not blind, right?" A ProPublica report finds that more than 170 U.S. citizens have been detained by ICE agents at raids and protests across the country. More than 20 citizens were held in detention without being able to contact their loved ones or a lawyer. ICE agents also arrested 130 citizens, including a dozen elected officials, for allegedly interfering with or assaulting officers. Those cases were dropped. A federal judge has lifted travel restrictions for Mahmoud Khalil, ruling the Palestinian activist and green card holder is free to attend...
Yeah, don't let these thugs intimidate you. They have no legal basis for what they're doing.
...speaking engagements around the U.S. as he fights the Trump administration's attempts to deport him. The Columbia University graduate was the first pro-Palestinian campus protester to be jailed by the Trump administration over his advocacy work. During a court hearing Thursday, Khalil's lawyer, Alina Das, said, quote, "He wants to travel for the very significant First Amendment reasons that are at the bottom of this case." The federal government shutdown has entered its 17th day. On Thursday, the Senate failed to advance a Republican-sponsored stopgap funding bill for the 10th time, as Democrats continue to demand Republicans rescind deep cuts to Medicaid and restore tax credits that have made health insurance more affordable for millions of people. The Senate also failed to advance a Defense Department appropriations bill to fully fund the U.S. military for a year. Meanwhile, the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, known as SNAP, has begun denying new applications in some places, with some 40 million low-income people at risk of losing benefits if the shutdown drags into November. The Trump administration is preparing to install allies of President Trump at the IRS to pursue criminal inquiries of left-leaning groups and major Democratic donors. That's according to the Wall Street Journal, which reports the move would allow Trump's allies to exert greater control at the IRS's Criminal Investigative Division and weaken the involvement of IRS lawyers in criminal probes. The changes are reportedly being spearheaded by Gary Shapley, an advisor to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Shapley is said to be putting together a list of targets for the IRS to pursue, including billionaire Democratic donor George Soros and his affiliated groups. Organizers of nationwide anti-authoritarian protests say they're expecting millions of people to join at least 2,500 rallies across all 50 states and several U.S. territories on Saturday. They say this weekend's No Kings protests should far surpass the 5 million protesters who turned out for No Kings Day events in June.
Damn.
Ahead of the protest, Texas Governor Greg Abbott said he's calling up the Texas National Guard. Meanwhile, House Speaker Mike Johnson condemned the protests, using talking points repeatedly by Republicans and far-right pundits.
I encourage you to watch. We call it the Hate America rally that'll happen Saturday. Let's see who shows up for that. I bet you see pro-Hamas supporters. I bet you see Antifa types. I bet you see the Marxist in full display.
Here in New York, organizers expect Saturday's protests to rival June's No Kings events, when an estimated 175...
It's just they have nothing. No criticisms at all. It is so American to not want an oligarchy, you know? And say what you want about the No Kings protest, credit where credit's due, they are organized.
...of the November 4th election. Here's New York Assembly member Zohran Mamdani going after former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo.
What New Yorkers need is a mayor who can stand up to Donald Trump and actually deliver on that safety. When Donald Trump sent ICE agents on people in Los Angeles, Andrew Cuomo said that New Yorkers need not overreact. That is the furthest answer that New Yorkers are looking for. They are looking for someone who will lead, someone who will say that they will have their back, someone who will actually fight for the people of this city. And that's who I am, because I'm not funded by the same donors that gave us Donald Trump's second term, which isn't something that Andrew Cuomo can say.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Nermeen Sheikh in New York, joined by Amy Goodman in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Nermeen, and hello to everyone in this.
Pretty nice. A whale shark washed up on the beach of Khan Yunis. Apparently, a 10-meter, 30-ton whale shark, one of the world's largest fish, washed ashore in southern Gaza today. There is no marine equipment to return it to the sea, and the whale shark meat is eaten in Japan, Denmark, and the Arctic. Look at this spectacle, man. Looks like they're trying to flip it over. A lot of people are there to help, I guess. Whale sharks are fucking huge. This is an excuse to look at whale shark videos because they'll be able to, mark my words, build stuff with the bones. And I don't want to say that they will make weapons, but you could make, you know, clubs or small knives with the bones. That's probably ill-advised. They're probably just looking at it as an incredible amount of food that has not shown up by the hands of human beings, but here we are with Mother Nature. Whale sharks. What is going to be massive fish, possibly a whale shark, washed up on shore of Khan Yunis? Yeah, it's on YouTube now as well. Let's see. Maybe not a video of it being cute with a diver. Maybe not.
This is the largest known fish species in the entire world, the whale shark. They're one of the ocean's most gentle giants and can measure up to 12 meters in length.
It's a lot of meat.
Despite their size, they are docile animals, and unlike other sharks, which
some sharks have like weird skeletons as well. Whale shark skeleton. It's the only living species of the genus Rhinocodon and is the only extant member of the family Rhinoconidae, which believes in... Okay. Whoa, the lifespan of a whale shark is estimated between 80 and 130 years. Whoa, whale shark mouths can contain over 300 rows of tiny teeth and 200 filter pads, which it uses to filter feed. The spiracles are located just behind the eyes. They have 5 large pairs of gills. Their skin is dark gray. Their skin can be up to 5.9 inches thick or 15 centimeters thick? Bro, like, their skin can get to be that thick. Holy shit. I'm trying to find information about their skeletons. Their maximum size and growth patterns are not well understood. Whoa. These are a bunch of different whales. Google is trash now. Not me doing Control F for the word skeleton on the Wiki. Whoa. This doesn't even contain the word skeleton. Damn. Is it all just like cartilage or something? I guess so. But anyway, pretty remarkable that it just washed up on shore. From a whale shark carcass, various products can be made, including oil for cosmetic and industrials, meat and fins for food, and skin for products like handbags. It must be really durable skin. Oil, fertilizer, biodiesel, bones, processed into protein meal, historical applications for baleen, a material in some whales' mouth, not whale sharks. Okay. Moving on. We talked about this guy yesterday who lost his sight. Apparently from being like hit in the head a lot, but that was a misreporting of the translation. Like is now saying that his eyes were electrocuted. And this is from a Palestinian journalist here. In the first video I watched of him, it didn't even pan down. Like, I didn't even know he was missing a leg until he mentioned it. Like, bro. Absolutely horrific. This is a pregnant mother in a full body wrap put on by ICE agents. In my city, at our airport, Indianapolis International Airport, says it will not play videos showing Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem blaming Democrats for the government shutdown, which is interesting because my state is a very red state. Went to Trump every single time. I mean, it's the state that made ooh, I'm blanking on Trump's first vice president's name. Mike Pence. Ah, that was a great world I was living in for a minute there where I couldn't remember Mike Pence's name. Here's RFK saying some basically pedophilic shit.
Today, the average teenager in this country has 50% of the sperm count, 50% of the testosterone as a 65-year-old man. Our girls are hitting puberty 6 years earlier, and that's bad. But also, our parents aren't having children. Parents who want to have children do not have access. I have 7 children.
Okay, that's enough of that. A lot of news about Tomonobu Itagaki passing away. Rest in power, King.
This is Democracy Now!
Let's dive into the Venezuela situation.
DemocracyNow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Nermeen Sheikh with Amy Goodman in Santa Fe.
The Washington Post is reporting U.S. Special Operations helicopters and B-52 strategic bombers have been spotted flying less than 90 miles off the coast of Venezuela. Meanwhile, President Trump's authorized the CIA to carry out lethal covert operations inside Venezuela. The U.S. is also continuing to strike what they say are suspected drug boats in the Caribbean, despite growing questions over the legality of the strikes.
Stunning development, the U.S. Admiral who commands military forces in Latin America, Alvin Halsey, is stepping down early from his post as head of U.S. Southern Command, reportedly because he had concerns about the U.S. attacking boats in the Caribbean. Halsey is the first African-American commander of SOUTHCOM. Earlier this week, President Trump was questioned by a reporter about U.S. military operations in the Caribbean.
Mr. President, on Venezuelan boats, I want to ask you, why not have the Coast Guard stop them, which is empowered by law to do? You know, this way you can confirm who's on the boat and ensure that they're doing what you suspect.
Because we've been doing that for 30 years, and it has been totally ineffective. They have faster boats. Some of these boats are seriously, I mean, they're world-class speedboats, but they're not faster than missiles. But we've been trying to do that for years, and so much of the drugs, 25-30%, would come in through the seas.
What's the next step in this war on cartels, and are you considering options, are you considering strikes on land?
Well, I don't want to tell you exactly, but we are certainly looking at land now, because we've got the sea very well under control.
We're joined now by David Cole, professor in law and public policy at the Georgetown University Law Center. He's the former national legal director at the ACLU. His new piece in the New York Review of Books about Trump's bombing of boats in the Caribbean is titled Getting Away with Murder. Welcome back to the program, David Cole. If you could just start out by responding to these attacks and lay out your argument in the New York Review of Books piece, Getting Away with Murder.
Sure. You know, we have the power and the authority to make drug smuggling a crime. We have the power and the authority to interdict boats that are bringing drugs.
I don't think it takes a professor to make this statement, but I'm interested to hear what he has to say.
Into this country. We have the power and the authority to try people. If they're convicted by a jury, they can then be sentenced to a period of time in prison. What we do not have authority to do, what we do not have any legal authority to do, is to just execute people from the skies without any evidence, without any trial, without any showing that they pose some sort of imminent danger to anybody. And yet that's what President Trump is doing. He's taken a metaphor, the war on drugs, and mistook it for an actual war, and is now engaged in premeditated execution of civilians. We're not at war. No one even heard of this organization in Venezuela, Tren de Aragua, until President Trump declared that they were somehow attacking us and justifying his use of military force. So we're not at war. And even if we were at war, people on these boats are civilians. They are not attacking us. And under the international rules that govern armed conflict, you cannot target civilians unless they are actually engaged in hostilities against you, unless they're actually shooting against you. That is not what's going on here. These are sitting ducks, and we are simply engaged.
It's so crazy to think that you're watching, in this compilation, you're watching 25 people get murdered. Like, that's just hard to wrap my head around. I mean, even in this one, you could see the people. When they pan out and the boat's on fire, just know that there are people who have been obliterated. What's left of them is on fire. And only now do we have a survivor. Oh my God. This is all about to fall apart. Either Trump will double down and triple down and actually do a ground invasion of Venezuela, which, bro, what is in the Epstein files is what I'm thinking. Like, bro, why all of a sudden are you so bloodthirsty and warmongery about Venezuela? It doesn't have anything to do with you being implicated, really? I just find that hard to believe. Trump is acting out.
In cold-blooded murder of individuals who may or may not be drug smugglers.
So, David Cole, you have actually Republicans as well who are condemning this, like Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul. And I want to ask, what if the situation were reversed, right? What if a foreign country was targeting U.S.
Saw one of the guys, like, duck their heads down.
ships, saying, without giving evidence, that these were drug smuggling ships, and saying that their intelligence operations are now operating covertly in the United States. And there is, and at least at this point, some 27 people have been killed. What do you feel those in the United States can do to enforce the law? This is about the rule of law. It looks like Trump is imminently going to attack Venezuela. I don't know if this is to divert attention from the possibility of the release of the Epstein files, but he has so upped the ante here.
Hire me, Democracy Now!
There is a problem of drug smuggling across the Canadian border from the United States to Canada. But does that give Canada the right to start executing Americans who it believes might be engaged in smuggling drugs? Absolutely not. And if Canada did that to Americans, we would be up in arms. We would be essentially treating that as an act of war and an unprovoked act of war. So this is under domestic law, it's murder. Under international law, it's a war crime. It's great that Rand Paul is standing up against it, but we should all be standing up against it. The notion that the President of the United States can order premeditated murder of individuals who do not pose any sort of threat, who are not shooting at us, are not attacking us, is completely outrageous. And
alright. There's an audio bug on my end. We'll move on to drop site news. Jeremy Scahill talks to Ali Abunimah about the state of the Gaza ceasefire. I feel like, do they do double uploads? Yeah. I don't know why they upload this twice. Am I crazy? Identical thumbnails? Like, what's going on? One has 23k views, one has 1.2k views. Weird.
Electronic Intifada is going to be joining me for a wide-ranging discussion on the state of the so-called ceasefire in Gaza. And as we're speaking, right now, Israel already is continuing its pattern of violating this supposed agreement that Donald Trump is touting as the most magnificent peace plan that has ever been unleashed on the Middle East. I want to begin on this issue of Palestinian hostages, Palestinian captives, political prisoners. Pick up from where I left off and maybe explain to people what this is like for Palestinians as their loved ones are either freed from captivity or they go on a macabre quest to try to determine if the bodies that have been returned belong to their loved ones.
I think the thing that has been really galling for me is seeing all the tweets from Western political leaders and politicians celebrating with ecstasy that all the so-called Israeli hostages are now home and how wonderful this is for their families. Recalling that the last 20 Israelis released were all soldiers, prisoners of war. Some of them even said they wanted to join the army and go straight back to helping to impose apartheid and settler colonialism and genocide on the Palestinian people. Yet these have all been presented as, you know, these lovely, innocent people. Now, I won't deny the joy of anyone being released from captivity or their family, but they have just completely ignored the 2,000 Palestinians who are released and the many thousands more who are still in Israeli detention. And if you look at Palestinian media and social media over the last few days, what you see are these scenes of Palestinians embracing their loved ones who have just been released, sometimes in horrific condition, and there's been no attention to that. They're looking emaciated, they're looking like they have been through hell, because they have. They've been describing the utter degradation and humiliation that they have experienced in Israeli detention, including in the days going right up to their release. As Ad-Damir, the Palestinian prisoners' rights group, said, the released prisoners appeared exhausted and frail, confirming that during the 4 days preceding their release, they were subjected to various forms of abuse and ill treatment, including severe beatings, humiliation, prolonged shackling, and threats not to speak to any media outlet about the conditions of their imprisonment. The prolonged suffering inside the occupation's prisons was evident on their faces and bodies. Many had lost dozens of kilograms and were visibly weak and fatigued. And let's recall, of course, Jeremy, that there is no imposed famine in Israel. It is Israel's choice to starve these detainees. But the other thing that's worth noting is who many of these detainees are. For example, one of those who was released was Dr. Mohammed Abu Musa, a radiologist from Nasser Hospital in Gaza, who was kidnapped in February 2024 when occupation forces stormed the hospital and kidnapped him while he was on duty. Other medical personnel were released by the Israelis. Why were they even detained in the first place? And of course, there are many more doctors and nurses and medics who are still in Israeli custody, including Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya. And then if you look at the long-term prisoners who were released, some 250 long and life-term prisoners, the vast majority of them, 157, were members of Fatah. So they're not even members of Hamas, which shows that the Palestinian resistance is trying to represent and serve the entire political spectrum. Just over 60 of them were from Hamas and the rest were from other factions. And most of them have gone into exile, been forced into exile by Israel to Egypt and other countries, of those long-term prisoners, which again shows that this is not really freedom. They're not being allowed to return to their homes and villages and towns and families. They're being forced into another kind of prison, the prison of exile. And then I just want to point finally, Jeremy, to the fact that in this release, only a tiny handful of children were released by Israel, and I think just a couple of women. And Ad-Damir again notes that there are still over 9,000 Palestinians in Israeli prisons, including 52 women, 400 children, and more than 3,500 so-called administrative detainees. Those are people held without even the pretense of a charge or trial. And still more than 100 long-term and life sentence prisoners. So for all the joy of those being released, the vast majority of Palestinian political prisoners and prisoners of war are still in Israel's torture camps and dungeons.
Yeah, Ali, just to give people a bit of context about some of what you're saying here in the context of the ceasefire, when the Palestinian negotiating delegation was dealing with Trump's people and dealing with the Israelis, and this has been true in all of these negotiations, one of the primary stated goals of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood on October 7th was to free Palestinian prisoners and free Palestinian hostages from Israeli custody. In fact, Yahya Sinwar, the late leader of Hamas, he himself was freed from an Israeli prison in 2011 as part of an exchange deal for the Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit. And when Sinwar was in prison, he was there for 2 decades. He had studied the memoirs of Israeli intelligence officials, became fluent in Hebrew, and then translated those memoirs into Arabic and distributed them among other prisoners. And part of the reason that was listed as one of the top goals of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood is that history has shown that this is the only way that Palestinians who are given multiple life sentences by Israel ever see the light of day again. And the treatment of Palestinian prisoners has always been sadistic, torturous, grotesque, but it's gotten even worse since Itamar Ben-Gvir took over as the Minister of Interior Security. I mean, this is from the testimony we're reading and hearing of Palestinians that come out, the level of sadism, the intensity of the torture is increasing.
And it started before October 7th. I mean, this is really crucial to point out. Of course, for decades,
the chicken on status quo.
More than 750,000 Palestinians have been put through Israel's prisons since the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza in 1967. That number dates from before October 7th. It's considerably higher now. And the treatment has always been terrible. We can go into that history, but the severe, deliberate degradation of that treatment, the deliberate imposition of extreme, cruel, and unusual degrading treatment, including denial of food, denial of medical care on a mass scale, denial of showers, of hygiene, was started by Itamar Ben-Gvir long before October 7th. And so that treatment of the prisoners was one of the precipitating factors for the October 7th resistance operation. And it's important to point that out because, you know, in the Israeli Western narrative, nothing ever bad had ever happened before October 7th. The first people ever to suffer in captivity were those Israelis taken captive on that day. And there's no acknowledgement given to the horror that Palestinians, including hundreds of children each year, are put through in Israeli detention.
And children, as you've written about, as I've written about, are often subjected to a military trial system where they're denied basic fundamental rights to legal counsel or meeting with lawyer or to see evidence against them. And it's what, you know, Israel is in a company with some of the most rogue regimes on earth with treating children, with subjecting children to military tribunal systems.
It's the only country in the world that has been doing that systematically. And that all predates October 7th.
And so the point I was getting at here is that when the Palestinian negotiators went into these negotiations with Trump's people, they understood that for many of the Palestinian prisoners who are serving multiple life sentences, you know, there's been a lot of focus on Marwan Barghouti, and rightly so. He is a very popular, well-known Palestinian political prisoner, a leader of the Palestinian Intifada. He is not Hamas. He is someone that consistently polls at the top if there were to be democratic elections in Palestine, but he is not the only prisoner that was on that list. And I think it's interesting, you alluded to this or stated it quite directly. A non-Hamas figure from a party that is the direct rival to Hamas was always number one on Hamas's list for release. And I've heard, you know, liberal pundits who are, you know, pro-Palestine make a point saying, oh, Marwan Barghouti would represent a threat to both Israel and to Hamas. And I think that this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the importance of these prisoners to all Palestinians, but also how the resistance views someone like Marwan Barghouti. You know, Hamas is portrayed in an oversimplified, cartoonish way. And if you actually speak to people who are in the leadership of Hamas, they view themselves primarily as a national liberation struggle. And throughout the course of this genocide, they have not just said, well, Hamas decides what happens in these negotiations. They consult with a wide range of political factions. And that's also why on the negotiating team officially this time was not only Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but also PFLP, a secular, historically left-wing organization. And it was Fatah, the ruling party of Mahmoud Abbas, that has refused for 2 years to engage in this intra-Palestinian dialogue. So I wanted to ask you about this because I've heard from Palestinians within the resistance also, they were extremely disappointed that they did not succeed in getting some of these high-profile political prisoners sentenced to multiple life sentences out, and that their last opportunity basically for freedom was when Donald Trump was in that airplane on his way to go to Israel and Sharm el-Sheikh, and that some felt that they should have tried to exert more pressure, knowing that Trump wanted to land with those living Israeli captives already freed. If you understand what I'm saying, that strategically, I've heard some criticism that maybe they should have pushed harder and withheld the release of some of those Israeli captives until Marwan Barghouti, Ahmed Sadat, Abdullah Barghouti, others were on that list to be freed.
I can't second guess the negotiators. We know, and we talked about this when you were on the Electronic Intifada live stream recently, the pressure that they were under, the pressure that they felt on themselves to end the bombardment, to end the massacres and the bloodletting, to get aid into people. And I think the more distance we get from the agreement that they signed on October 10th, the more clear it is that they protected fundamental principles, even though they had to make tactical compromises here and there. So I would imagine that they would have pushed as far as they could go. And they have said, at least from statements I've seen, that they don't give up on any prisoner. There are still, as I just said, more than 9,000 Palestinians in the Israeli torture camps and prisons. And I assume they would have wanted to get all of them released. Also, they would not have wanted anyone to be forced into exile, and yet they had to accept that too. So I'm not going to second guess them and say, oh, they could have done more here and more there. I'm certain they would have pushed as hard as they could. And as I pointed out, the majority, 157 out of 250 of the long-term and life sentence prisoners were from Fatah, were from that rival faction of Mahmoud Abbas. I don't want to impugn those prisoners because absolutely they gave their freedom in for the cause. But when we talk about Mahmoud Abbas, that's a different story, and he is openly hostile to Hamas and to the resistance, and still closely allied with Israel. And yet the resistance actually freed mostly long-term and lifetime prisoners from Mahmoud Abbas's movement.
I pick up on the point I was making earlier, though, about the discourse around Marwan Barghouti. And also, I should say that some prisoners that were freed in this exchange issued some very severe warning alarms about the abuse that he has been subjected to. There's been a trickle of some information about him, and I would imagine this applies to many of these Palestinians that are locked up by Israel serving these life sentences, that particularly after October 7th, the Israeli, I think one of the freed Palestinian prisoners said that they declared war on Marwan Barghouti after October 7th, and really intensified the torture and the beatings. And he's been held in solitary confinement. His family hasn't been able to visit him for an extended period of time at all, and he's been severely restricted to the amount of time he can even see his lawyers. But this discourse around him, where people are saying, where you hear some people saying, well, Barghouti would represent a threat to Hamas, I think it sticks with me because I think it is a way of trying to denounce the right of Palestinian armed resistance by portraying Marwan Barghouti in a certain sense, but also feeding into the narrative that what Hamas wants is just power, and that somehow there isn't any principle at play here.
I think when it comes to Marwan Barghouti, we have to distinguish between two Marwan Barghoutis. There is Marwan Barghouti the man, and there is Marwan Barghouti the symbol. And Marwan Barghouti the man is a Palestinian political prisoner being held by Israel, being tortured and abused like thousands of other prisoners, who deserves to be freed because all Palestinians should be out of the dungeons of this colonial occupier. That is very clear. And so Marwan Barghouti should be freed like all of the Palestinian political prisoners, including Ahmed Saadat and the other leaders of various political factions. Marwan Barghouti, the symbol, plays a different role for different audiences. He is clearly seen by the Palestinians, by the Palestinian people at large, as a symbol of their struggle and as someone who is paying a very high price for his involvement in that struggle. And therefore, he is someone who gains a lot of sympathy and support. But what Marwan Barghouti stands for politically is, beyond that, is sort of a blank slate, and people are imposing on him all sorts of views of what they would like him to represent that we don't know if he does or he doesn't. And one of those is that, he is this charismatic leader who could challenge Hamas and sweep Hamas away in elections, and they like him for that reason. Another view that exists on the Israeli left, where we've seen, the so-called Israeli left, to the extent that there's a left in Israel, is that Marwan Barghouti is a Palestinian leader with the credibility and the popular support to be able to make concessions to Israel. And therefore, we've also seen in recent years expressions of support from the Israeli left for him to be freed. All of that is speculation, and it's extremely unfair to Marwan Barghouti, who has not been given the opportunity to articulate his own political outlook in the current circumstance. He's been cut off from the world for decades by being held in these extreme Israeli conditions. So I think we have to be very careful about the efforts to project onto Marwan Barghouti all sorts of political significance that he may or may not have. But absolutely, as a political prisoner, he deserves the full support and solidarity and deserves to be freed as soon as possible. And it would have been, of course, a moment of great joy if he had been freed in this exchange, which is precisely why Israel wouldn't free him, because they don't want to give Palestinians that satisfaction and that sense of victory by seeing Marwan Barghouti or Ahmed Saadat or some of these other major struggle figures released. It would have deepened the sense of Israeli frustration and failure. And probably that's something that the negotiators understood, that this was just going to be a bridge too far at this phase, and they had to make that decision, and I wouldn't be in a position to second guess it.
Yeah, fair enough. I want to shift gears and ask you about the way that this issue of disarmament is being talked about, because this is now, and we talked about this on Electronic Intifada as well, that this was going to immediately become the focus after the Israeli captives were returned or released. Now, Israel, the Israeli media, the Israeli government is saying if Hamas doesn't essentially surrender, if it doesn't disarm, that Israel is going to do it. And which is interesting in and of itself, because that's been the goal for 2 years, and they have been militarily.
Yeah, why didn't they? If they could do it, what stopped them? If they have some magic formula for disarming and demilitarizing Hamas, why haven't they done it? Clearly, they can't. And Donald Trump saying the other day, they're going to disarm very quickly, or we're going to do it very quickly and very violently, it's just empty talk, because they did everything they could. There's scarcely anything worse that we can imagine that Israel and the United States could do to Gaza in an attempt to destroy the resistance. And because Israel had no capability militarily to defeat the resistance, they did what Israel always does, except to much greater extremes, which is go after the civilian population. That's the Israeli doctrine. You target the civilians, you bomb them, you starve them, you displace them, you terrorize them, in the hope that you will inflict so much pain and suffering on the civilian population that they will turn against the resistance. And they will say, you brought this upon us. You irresponsible men with guns, if you had not done what you did on October 7th, we wouldn't be suffering this way. And maybe there are a few Palestinians who feel that way, and I wouldn't begrudge them that feeling after the horrors they've been through. But clearly that has failed on the large scale. And on the contrary, what we see is Hamas and other resistance factions still with very strong support in Gaza. The resistance fighters have strong support, and people seem to be supporting the Hamas-led forces coming back into the streets and restoring law and order, which is something that Israel deliberately set out to destroy by recruiting these mercenary collaborator gangs, the Yasser Abu Shabab gang and others. And even Donald Trump came out and said, we let Hamas keep its weapons, and they cleaned up some very bad gangs, and there's a lot of criminality. So even Donald Trump apparently supported that. But the question is, can he now do anything to take away the weapons of the resistance? Not by force. And so the question is this, this is a huge built-in landmine into his so-called peace plan, because it's impossible to see the resistance disarming voluntarily outside the context of a comprehensive agreement that restores Palestinian rights. And I don't see Israel also, backing down on this. And so it seems to be a built-in major landmine.
Yeah, and for now, just to be clear, the official position of the two main armed resistance organizations, or the two main organizations that have large armed resistance factions, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, their official position remains that disarmament is a Palestinian issue, and that this cuts to the heart of the legitimacy of the struggle for self-determination in a Palestinian state, and that any suggestion about laying down arms can only happen in the context of the constitution of a Palestinian national army capable of defending itself in the world. And so that remains, whether or not there will be a technical way of trying to have some decommissioning, or there's going to be pressure from Arab states. That's all stuff that, if you talk to Hamas and Islamic Jihad officials, they'll say these are issues that need to be discussed with a broad section of Palestinian society, and it has to be in the context of a hudna, a long-term truce, and the constitution of an actual armed force operating under the banner of the Palestinian flag and an independent state. That remains the official position. I definitely want to talk to you about this issue of the rest, the actions that are being taken against people accused of being collaborators, war profiteers, thieves, looters, etc. But just one other issue on disarmament. I wanted to read you, Ali, from last night. As I said earlier, a couple of senior Trump administration officials gave one of these background briefings to reporters, where this is common among all administrations, where you can't say their name, but they're sort of answering questions. I just want to read you some comments on a couple of these issues you've mentioned. So on the issue of disarmament of the Palestinian resistance and demilitarization of Gaza, one of the senior advisors to President Trump acknowledged that demilitarizing Gaza is complex and difficult element involved with the ceasefire negotiations. And this is a quote: "Right now, we're in the process of defining how to get there in a way where everyone feels safe. It's not realistic to think everyone's just going to walk in, drop their arms, and say, there you go. A lot of the people, even on the Hamas side, are fearful of retribution from other people inside Gaza. So it's a very complex dynamic." Still, the advisor said, the U.S., quote, "wants to continue to work together to find a way of doing it. We're all working very closely, creatively, and aggressively to find the right outcome that satisfies everyone's objectives." What do you make of those comments?
Well, you could take it as recognition that they understand that just getting the resistance to surrender is not realistic. But all of this depends on what the bigger vision is. If they want to just treat Gaza in isolation, that's not going to go anywhere. Gaza is a fundamental part of Palestine. The people in Gaza are part of the Palestinian people, and their struggle is part of the Palestinian struggle. Gaza didn't, the resistance in Gaza didn't just fight for Gaza, which is just 2 or 3% of historic Palestine in terms of land area. They fought for the Palestinian cause. And we've heard analogies, which very, very cheaply made analogies without real depth to, even the language that was in Trump's 20-point plan was stolen from the agreements that were signed in the context of the peace process in Ireland, which talk about a process of decommissioning, of placing weapons beyond use, of demilitarization, and so on. But in the context of Ireland, those were reciprocal agreements where all the parties had to decommission and demilitarize as part of an overall political settlement. So it wasn't just the Irish Republican Army and Irish nationalist factions that had to decommission and demilitarize. It was also the Loyalist and Unionist factions. It was the British Army had to be withdrawn. It was the Royal Ulster Constabulary, which was the sectarian, thuggish police force of the British state, had to be dismantled and replaced with a non-sectarian police service in Northern Ireland, and so on. And people can criticize, people do debate and criticize those agreements. But the point I'm making is that there was a reciprocal process. Here, there is no reciprocity. Why should the Palestinian resistance and the Palestinian people have to disarm when they are under occupation, when they are fighting for liberation? Israel should have to disarm. Israel, which perpetrated the Holocaust, should have to disarm. Its army should be placed under international supervision and monitoring. Its war criminals need to be taken for trial and justice. So the whole discourse that focuses on Palestinians as if they are the problem and not Israel is fundamentally unjust and unworkable. And so even those comments from that administration official you cited, Jeremy, which seem to recognize the difficulties, they still exist within that context of blaming the Palestinians for resisting, which is their right, against Israel's brutal genocidal occupation.
And well said. This is a lot of what was talked about on the Electronic Intifada the same day. Yeah, this was streamed yesterday. Yeah, let's check out anything about ICE from Status Quo. No. Yeah, I don't really want to watch videos of people trolling ICE. It's playing with fire. I'm gonna leave it there. Thanks for checking it out. I'll have my NYC mayoral debate reaction uploaded pretty soon. Free Palestine, fuck Israel, and crush Zionism forever. Peace.
Where's your fucking badge, you pigs? We go hard for Palestine. We escalate for Palestine. We fight for Palestine. We give it everything we got. We do not work with the police. We do not point people out to the police. We do not lay hands on our comrades. When we go hard for our people, you ain't staying out the way. If you ain't with it,